Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about AI or artificial intelligence on Blue Iris. One of the most helpful features of Blue Iris is being able to use AI like CodeProject or DeepStack. The reason for this is being able to detect a person, a dog, a car, truck, boat, and you can set it up so that you only get alerted. So a push notification to your phone, for example, when one of those things are confirmed. This reduces false positives, limiting the number of random notifications you get that actually were just a shadow. Now, Blue Iris used to default to using DeepStack.AI, but recently has moved over to CodeProject.AI. It will still work with DeepStack, but it seems like the Blue Iris team is moving toward CodeProject, so my suggestion is you do the same. So today we're going to install CodeProject.AI on the same computer that we have Blue Iris installed on. Keep in mind though, you don't have to have CodeProject.AI running on the same computer. It could be running on a Docker image, for example, on a server. So let's move over to the computer and we'll get started. An easy way to find the CodeProject.AI website is to click on the gear, the settings, go to check for news and updates. In the bottom left here, you'll see Install CodeProject.AI. So we'll click on that. It should bring us out to the web and give us the latest version. So the latest version at this time of filming the video is 2.0.8. So it's downloaded. Let's open that up. Actually, we're going to click Extract. And now we have CodeProject. So if we double click on that, it's going to install. So we'll agree. Yes. And it will take a little bit of time. It does pull down quite a bit of data. In artificial intelligence and machine learning, there are models that this is trained on. So for example, what does a person look like? Well, they'll have a whole bunch of pictures of a person, all different shapes and sizes and colors. And that is how the software is trained. So it detects what a person is. Same thing with a dog or anything else. So it has to pull down that model so that the software can effectively do that detection. Now, the nice thing about CodeProject.AI and DeepStack as well is that it runs locally. It can run locally. You could run it in the cloud. In fact, I do have an instance running on an EC2 server in AWS as a test, and it's working well. Most people will run it on their local machine. So that's why it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to install all the dependencies that it needs to be able to run this. So don't get nervous and think it failed if it hangs up for a while. It is still working in the background. Like I said, it does take some time. In fact, it also pulls down quite a bit of data. One thing to note while this installs, running CodeProject.AI does take system resources. So what's going to happen is you're going to actually send still images every time Blue Iris detects motion. For example, you set up the motion detector, it detects motion. It's going to send images over to CodeProject, which is also running on your Blue Iris machine. And CodeProject is then going to analyze those images and reply to Blue Iris with an answer of, did it detect something? That processing of having to look at the image, go against the model that it's based on, and then reply to Blue Iris takes CPU cycles or GPU cycles. So if the PC you're running Blue Iris on is already very high utilization on CPU and GPU, you may not be able to run CodeProject.AI on that same device. Now your mileage may vary though, because let's say there's just one camera that you want to do this detection on. It's your driveway camera, but the rest of the cameras you really don't care. You just want them recording. Well, that's not going to put as much load on as if you had 20 cameras all sending images every time they see motion, and it's a windy day with leaves blowing or it's raining. All right, so when it's finally done, you'll see installation successfully completed. So we're back in Blue Iris, and what we need to do is tell Blue Iris where to find the AI server that's on this computer at the global setting. And then individually, we could go to each camera and specify whether we want that camera to be sending images to CodeProject.AI. So let's go over to settings and let's go to AI. We're going to turn on AI. And since this is running locally on this PC, This is the local host IP address. Kind of looks like a funny IP address, but that is the typical local IP. And then this is the port that is default for CodeProject.AI. And you do want to auto start and stop with Blue Iris, so I would suggest clicking that, but everything else you can leave as default. Now, if you have a GPU or a graphics card in your computer, use GPU might be checked. Now, I'm unchecking use GPU because my graphics card is very low power. It's not going to do the job. But my CPU has quite a bit of power. I want CodeProject to use my CPU, not GPU. Now, it is nice that CodeProject has the option to use either. And if we click in Open AI Dashboard, it'll open up a browser window. It takes a second to load. And you'll actually see, we'll set up a camera in a second, but you'll see the objects coming in that are being requested by Blue Iris. And these are the images that are being asked to be processed by CodeProject. Here you'll see its CPU. If we click on these three dots, you can enable GPU, for example. If you were using the GPU, you would see GPU here. But if you can see this page, that means CodeProject is set up properly, and there's also a little counter of how many objects CodeProject has processed in a given session. So let's click back over to Blue Iris. We'll cancel out of this window, and let's set up a camera to start sending images over to CodeProject. So we'll right click on the camera, we'll go to camera settings, we'll go over to trigger. We already have the motion sensor set up. So that's what we'll do. We'll configure the motion sensor. We'll keep everything as is. You can play with minimum object size and contrast and duration. This video is not about the motion sensor. All these options will affect the sensitivity of it. We'll leave all these the same. I don't have any zones set up, so I'll leave that unchecked. And object detection, if you want Blue Iris to try to detect an object and then only send images to CodeProject when it detects an object, you can keep this checked. If not, you can uncheck it and send the images to CodeProject and let CodeProject figure it out. So that's what I'll do for this scenario. We'll click OK. And now we're going to go onto the when triggered and click on artificial intelligence. So now for this camera, we need to select CodeProject.AI or DeepStack. In our case, it's CodeProject.AI. And these are the things to confirm. Now you can go onto the CodeProject.AI website and see the full list of what it can detect, but these are what come default. So if it's in your backyard and you know there's no way a boat or a truck or something like that would get back there, you can remove those types of things. There should be a comma between each word, and there should be no spaces. This part right here sometimes can be a little bit confusing, so let's talk about it. There's three fields: minimum confidence, real-time images, analyze one each. So minimum confidence is how confident the AI is that it's detected one of these items, people, dog, cat, bus, whatever it is. It's going to run the processing, and it might come back that it thinks it's a person, but it's only a 20% confidence score. So if it's only 20%, that means it's likely not a person. So we don't want to get a notification for that. So you can adjust the confidence percentage to be as low or as high as you'd like. The default is 50%. It's a good place to start. A lot of my cameras I run in the 60 to 65% range, just because sometimes I do get false positives if a shadow looks like a human, for example. But this is something that you need to play with a little bit. Now, what about the real-time images? Notice it says plus real-time images. So it's going to send an initial image to CodeProject. Like we talked about before, CodeProject is going to process that. And then it's going to keep sending additional images at this interval. And if we drop down here, you can see there's a lot of different options. Now, also keep in mind, the more images that you're sending to CodeProject, the more processing that's happening. So it's going to increase your CPU or GPU load. These are the defaults here: 2 real-time images and analyze at 750 milliseconds. So let's put this into real world perspective. So let's say somebody's walking up my driveway. Blue Iris detects motion, and it sends an initial image, and then it sends an additional image and an additional image. So it'll send, in this scenario, it'll send 3 total images, and it'll send them 750 milliseconds or 3/4 of a second apart. If I were to change this to 5 and change this to 100, this would mean it's going to send the initial image, and then it's going to send one image every 1/10 of a second to CodeProject for processing. One important thing to note is that when CodeProject detects something, so let's say out of these, I guess this would be 6 images, the initial then plus 5 images. Let's say on the 3rd image, it detects a person. It stops looking at the rest of the images that are being sent, and it replies back to Blue Iris and says, I've detected a person. Generally, I would recommend starting with the defaults of 2 and 750 milliseconds and see what kind of results you get. A helpful hint here is if you're noticing that motion is detected, but CodeProject doesn't seem to be confirming it's a person or whatever it's confirming, you can uncheck this begin analysis with motion leading image. So a scenario where this might be helpful to uncheck that would be, let's say you have a long driveway, and at the very end of the driveway, the motion detector picks up some movement of a car pulling in, but it's too far away for CodeProject to detect it's a car. And then it's sending 2 additional images, but the car is still too far away. So CodeProject may reply with nothing found, when really, if it had waited until it got a little bit farther up the driveway, it would have detected it was a car. So sometimes that first image that Blue Iris sends to CodeProject is not a good enough image for CodeProject to really figure out what it is. Another important field that defaults to only when confirmed is fire actions. So this is where you would get an alert, let's say a push notification to your phone, only if something is confirmed. So in most people's cases, that's what you're going to want to leave it on. You don't want to get an alert every time the wind blows. But if you did, you could put this on always. You would still have the tagged person, car in your alerts, but you would still get a notification for every time there was motion. This checkbox here, fire non-email, SMS, or push actions regardless. If you were to check this, if you have, in addition to a push notification, for example, you have an action that sends a JPEG image to an FTP server. Let's just say there's a million actions you can do with Blue Iris. And you want that to happen regardless of what CodeProject detects. You can check this off so that the other actions that aren't alerts to your phone still happen. So let's click OK. And we'll click OK again. So I'm going to double click on this camera so it goes into full screen so you can see it. And we'll move this camera to be on me. We'll wave. And let's see if that detected. Yes. So you can see there's a little icon of a human right here. So it detects a human. If we go up to the status window, we should see, okay, cam, C2, AI, objects, person, it was 53%. And now it's an 81%. See, I'm still triggering the motion sensor on this camera. So you can see how long it took as well. So it took 367 milliseconds to come up with that. But if I turn this camera, it showed motion, but you saw how it disappeared. And if we go back into the status, AI alert canceled, nothing found. So if you have nothing found, then that means it got a motion detection from Blue Iris. It analyzed the images, and it came back to Blue Iris and said there was nothing there. The other thing you could see here is something called occupied. And what occupied means is that it is a static object that it found, and it's deciding not to trigger on it. So don't be alarmed if it says occupied. With the latest versions of Blue Iris at the time of filming this video, there's now a search bar. So you can actually search for person, and now I'll only see person. If I search for car, I would only see car. Obviously, I don't have car in here, but if I did, that's what you would see. So if we go back over to the web browser, we can actually see that there were 10 requests to CodeProject. And if we scroll up, we can actually see those object detections that the images are going into the queue, and CodeProject is working on those. If you go over to your task manager, you'll see the CodeProject.AI server, and you'll also see Python running. Now, Python is a coding language, but it's also an app that's running in the background, and that's what's actually running the code to do the processing. So you might see Python taking a lot of CPU usage, and that's normal. So for example, let's see if I can turn the camera toward me. Let's see if we can get Python to, yep, it went up to 20% when it did the detection. As you're setting this up and you're tweaking the settings, you will want to keep a close watch on Task Manager. It's just built into Windows. I usually pin it to my taskbar. That way I can see what my real CPU, GPU, and memory are doing. What's in Blue Iris is usually just what Blue Iris is taking for CPU and GPU, and it's not always 100% accurate. Using the Task Manager is a better way to monitor that. Now, if we just sit here and watch, you'll see, even though we have no motion in Blue Iris, every once in a while, you'll get an object detection in the queue for CodeProject. So you might think, why is that if there's no motion happening on any of these cameras? And the reason for that is, if you go back to camera settings, trigger, artificial intelligence, detect/ignore static objects. If this is selected, then Blue Iris will continue to send periodically images of the frame of each camera to CodeProject to detect what is a static object so that it can ignore it. When I first set this up, I was watching the CodeProject screen saying, what the heck? Why is the queue building when there's no motion? So that's the reason. If we go back into the camera settings and we go over to alerts, you may already have this set up for a particular camera, but on alert, this is where you would set up the push notification for your phone. You would do plus, you would click push notification, and then you have some choices. You can even drill down to having one particular AI object that you get a push notification for. So CodeProject will still look for all the objects in its list, but let's say you only want to know when there's a person, then you can put that here. I mentioned earlier in the video that you don't have to run CodeProject.AI on the same computer that you run Blue Iris on. In fact, sometimes it works out a lot better to not, especially if the computer is already at a high CPU or GPU load. In my case, I have an Unraid server, which is basically a network attached storage device, but I can run virtual machines, I can run Docker containers. I'm running a Docker container of CodeProject.AI on my network. And by the way, this is for my production system, not the one we're just working on. But Blue Iris will send the images to the Docker container that's running CodeProject, and the Docker container will reply back to Blue Iris. So it utilizes the CPU, the extra CPU power I have in my server instead of on the Blue Iris PC. You could even run CodeProject in the cloud on a cloud instance, and as long as your Blue Iris server can connect out to the CodeProject server, then it'll work just fine. So if you aren't going to use the Blue Iris PC to run CodeProject, you'll go back to settings, go over to AI, you'll put the IP address and the port of wherever you're running the CodeProject instance. If you're running it somewhere else, not on the same computer, I recommend unchecking auto start stop with Blue Iris. I found that it doesn't seem to work right if it's not running on the same computer. Now, we're not going to get into it in this video, but you actually can build your own custom models and include faces. So let's say you wanted to know when your wife was coming home, not just an Amazon delivery person. You could actually build a custom model. You can also turn on ALPR, so license plate recognition, and there's modules. If you go to install modules, there's other modules within CodeProject like the ALPR that you can use. My suggestion is get started with just the defaults, default object detection, and don't use the facial recognition or anything else until you're comfortable with it. One other thing is you'll notice this tiny, small, medium, large defaults to medium. This is the complexity of the model. If you increase this to large, it will increase your CPU consumption. Conversely, if you lower it to small or tiny, it should lower your CPU or GPU consumption. I'd start it off at medium and check in with your task manager to see where you're at. Like we saw before, if I do motion, you'll see Python pop up to the top, 10%, and go back down once it's done processing the images. So those are the basics for getting CodeProject.AI installed and configured within Blue Iris. If you haven't used any of the AI features within Blue Iris before, I highly suggest you do. It's free. CodeProject.AI is an open source project. You can go look at their GitHub repositories and look through the code if you wanted to. It runs locally, so you're not sending images up to the cloud. And most importantly, it limits the false positives. When I first started using Blue Iris, when there was no AI attached to it, I would get hundreds of false positives and end up turning off alerts. This way, I get a notification on my phone, and not only is it accurate, but it says person, it says dog. It actually will tell you what it detected. So at a glance, you can see what is in your vicinity. I'll do a follow-up video in the future on some of the more advanced features like building a custom model. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe. We do lots of videos about Blue Iris and surveillance in general. If you do have any questions or thoughts or suggestions about CodeProject.AI or using AI with Blue Iris, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and also like the video if you found this helpful. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.